Hello and welcome to another episode of Lowdown. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Hugo Scheckter, founder of the Player Care Group and one of the leading voices in football when it comes to player care. Hugo, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be joining you today.
Hugo, I suppose where I begin at the start of every episode is asking everybody where did their passion for football originate. For yourself, were you like every other kid growing up, dreaming of scoring goals in the back garden, pretending you're at Wembley, or did you know you wanted to do something else in the game?
To be honest, as a young kid, I never liked football. My family didn't like football. None of us watched it. And so, can't say I ever grew up really wanting to play it. I think it probably changed when I was about 11 or 12 when my friend brought over a Championship Manager. And I was super competitive with him on like the gaming stuff, being the really cool kid that I was. And he knew all the football teams. He was a Southampton fan, so he just knew every player. And I just didn't know. They were just like blank names to me. And so over the summer one year, I thought I'm going to get to know all the footballers so that when the next Championship Manager comes out, then Football Manager, then I'd beat him. And I read like Match Magazine and watched all the TV bits and Match of the Day and that. And then actually this is quite good. And then, so then got really into football from that. And, then did my coaching badges when I was at school. So I got my level 1 when I was 17 and then went to America for uni, did some more coaching out there. And I thought that's what I was going to do. But in speaking to coaches, they're like, unless you've played at a somewhat decent level, you're never going to make it as a top coach. You can be an okay coach, but they said there's much more upside in other parts of the game. So I looked more into like the business operations and the logistics side of it, which is what I did through uni. I coached and did that at the same time, coached girls, coached adult men. And my first job out of uni was moving to America, another American club and doing stuff there. So I can't say it was ever what I never dreamed of being a player, like genuinely never. I was a terrible, terrible player, but I dreamed of like being a manager, I guess, at some point, but I didn't really ever think that would happen. So quite happy with where I am now.
And then I suppose player care, which it's not only become your career, Hugo, it's actually, become your lifestyle, so to speak.
Yeah.
What exactly is it?
So for me, player care is everything that's not football or medical around the first team. And I'm specifically in the first teams. Obviously, there's academy player care as well, but my experience has always been with first team. So, it can be everything from, player relocations to, working with the families to team logistics, team communications, team bonding, even fan mail comes in, often under my department, signed items for sponsors and charities and that kind of stuff. So it's really kind of just bringing everything together that's not on the football side. So, the scouting, the analysis, the coaching, or the medical, which is, includes sports science and that as well. So everything else is, kind of somewhat related to me in that. So, but as it's kind of such a new industry, it's so different at so many different clubs. Some clubs do this, some clubs do that, and I think it's really interesting to see how the industry's kind of evolved, fairly organically over the last sort of 10, 15 years.
And when you made your initial foray into the industry, Hugo, at Indy 11, so to speak, was in more of a multifaceted role as team operations manager. How paramount was, I suppose, the area of player care? Then you were dealing with anything from kids coming out of college to a World Cup winner in Cleberson. What exactly did that role entail and look like?
Yeah, I can't say it was really a player care role. It was, we had 12 staff in the whole organization. So it was very much, getting involved in anything and everything. I was, doing the international transfer certificates for Cleberson when he arrived to, washing the kit and buying the drinks, in the local shop. So it was really just like, I was the only non-football person on the football side, if that makes sense. So from contracts to travel to kit, we had to build a training ground because there was nothing there. Dealing with the other teams, I even did ticket sales for a little bit, sponsorship. It was, in that sort of organization, I think it was a great learning experience. It's the hardest I've ever worked in my life, but, it was a great experience because you're just doing everything and you became quite close knit because, there's only 12 people there. So there's not like you can like send an email to someone that you don't know. And, it's, everybody, and that everyone's flat out. So, player care was such a small part of what I did. It was never, I mean, we didn't really do much for them. It wasn't that we didn't want to. It's just, in terms of priorities, it was pretty low down. So, we tried to make it as nice an environment as possible. But, I think I look back on what we did there and sort of from a player care point of view was fairly limited. But also, it's the American second division. It's a brand new team that sort of popped out of the ground, in a very American style. And so there wasn't just that time or that infrastructure to do it. And I think even if they'd said, would you want to do it? I think, to be honest, at that point, I'd rather have had some other help somewhere else. So, but it was a really cool experience. And I think I learned a lot about working on a very tight budget there. And how in the Premier League, it's all about performance and about, getting that best, the most out of everything. But there it was very much like, do the best you can, but with a limited budget. And so, I remember we would like travel to away games and we didn't want to pay the hotel like for the meals because they were, they'd mark it up. So at like 4 a.m, I'd go to the local like Walmart or something and buy fruit and basically breakfast and then put it outside, like on a bench outside, and everyone would come and eat it because it would save us, $150 than paying the hotel to have breakfast kind of thing. So it was just like, obviously in that, we never do that in the Premier League. In the Premier League, we travel with the chef and the nutritionist and all this kind of stuff. So, just night and day, but really, really fascinating, place to work.
And what age were you when you took on that role? It sounds like you had so many roles, responsibilities rolled in.
Yeah, I mean, I was 23 and like straight out of uni, and like in uni, I'd been quite, American uni is quite different to English or British uni because it's very much about the extracurriculars. So like I coached a cricket team that went to nationals and ran the team, like the business side, coached and ran the men's football team, oversaw, a group of athletes. It was like 1,000, student athletes and lobbied on their behalf, was in student government, wrote for the newspaper, had a radio show. Like I was super, super involved in that stuff. So like, I felt like I had, the level of responsibility. To be fair, my budget at university was similar to my budget in Indy 11 because, I think we had a budget for the student athletes that I oversaw of about $400,000 a year, which as a student was pretty crazy. And I think my operations budget for Indy 11 for the year was about the same. So like, probably actually a little bit less if I I could look it back. But, so I was kind of, it wasn't for me such a big jump. But the one thing I wasn't used to was in uni, I'd work my way to be the top of everything I did. So I was always that one, like president, executive director, whatever. And then to go and be like bottom of the pile, especially as when I started, I was team operations coordinator and then got promoted to team operations manager. It was really hard to be like, you're not making decisions, you're just getting things done. And in reality, I wasn't a decisions guy. I was a doer. But yeah, it was a really, really interesting experience.
It's not a criticism, but more so having attended college in the US, as you say yourself, and being given a budget of 400,000 run on behalf of student athletes.
Yeah.
That there was a closer approximation there and more of an acknowledgement of your part of what you were actually getting yourself involved to within the 11. But when you look at these football universities in the UK nowadays, given the massive amount of information which we have now in 2021, do you believe they're doing enough, or can they be doing more for students to enlighten them as to what they will basically encounter if they were to entail such roles in the football industry?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I really expected. Like to be honest, I got so involved at university that I was so convinced that I was so ahead of my peers. So like, I knew that at university, graduated in my class, there was nobody who had been more involved than me. And I made a point of that. Like my classes, I kind of, I attended them, I did the homework, but I was never that bothered about my grades. Like for me, the grades was the classes was something I had to do in order to get to be able to do the fun stuff that I enjoyed doing. So, my grades were average. And to be fair, no one has ever asked for my grades or what degree I got. But I left there thinking like, this is what's going to happen is when I graduate, I'm going to have Man United, Chelsea, Arsenal, and Tottenham all trying to fight over me. And I'm going to have like a bidding war and it's going to be crazy. And I left and I was like, no one wanted me. And genuinely, like, I think Indy 11 was, one of about 97 applications that I did after leaving uni. And to be fair, like I had 4 months with not even an interview. And I was like, I can't, I need to kind of get a job. So I'd actually already had plans with my dad. My dad runs a farm, and he was like, "You're going to come work for me." And I'd kind of already like resigned myself to going, "Yeah, all right." I'm gonna sort of. I thought I'd done the right thing in football, but obviously you're not getting any bites. So going to go work on the farm and maybe coach a local team, somewhere in rural England. So, and then Indy called, and then it was like, yeah, great, I'll go do that. But it was, I was shocked at that thing, and I think whether it's from school or from university, I think some of the students I speak to as well, and I know I was the same. They kind of do a degree and they think they know everything, and even when I left Southampton, I thought I knew everything, and I was taking it to West Ham, and then I've learned so much at West Ham, and then when I left West Ham, I thought I knew everything, and in the 4 months of me running my own business, I've learned a lot as well. So I think, I think it is you keep learning, but whether they prepare people, I couldn't tell you that. There were some really, really good students that I meet and have supported into roles, and there were some absolutely terrible students. But I think that would be the same for everything,
Yeah, of course. I suppose then moving on, you had the role at Indy 11, and then what comes next, Hugo, is taking on the player liaison role at Southampton.
Yeah.
Obviously, being at the forefront of Indy 11, helping establish a club from the ground up to moving into a tried and tested model, so to speak, at Southampton. What was the adaptation process like for yourself?
I mean, tried and tested in the fact the club had been there 100 years, sure, but player care didn't exist before I got there, really. So it was also a new thing for them. They'd never had anyone in the role. They'd never had anyone really doing it. It used to be part of what the club secretary did, but, she was very busy. And so it was, a small part of what she did. So in a way, I was still sort of forging that new path, which actually I've always, relished. But I think it was amazing that I went from a club, with 12 employees to, I don't know what we had at the beginning when I started, 250 employees. I mean, the scale of it, but also the interest in it. In Indy, we used to basically like try and beg people to come to our games. And at Southampton, we'd sell out most games. So, very, very different experience. Obviously, the quality of player was night and day. And I think, being a part of something that was so big was a bit of a shock to begin with, because, the players that I'd grown up managing on Football Manager or whatever, I was now working with them. So, it was like, it's Morgan Schneiderlin, it's, whoever, Jose Font, and it was like, oh, wow, I've heard of these guys, rather than Indy, when other than Clabberson, I was like Googling them to try and work out who they were. So for me, it was a lot of like, there was definitely a number of like fan moments where I was like, oh, this is so cool. And I remember, trying to transition from that fan, that sort of that supporter of football, the guy who always used to wake up early in America and watch all the games and knew every fact and tried to learn everything and read all the media, to then being a part of it and trying to be professional. I think that was quite a difficult challenge. One that I'm not sure that was obvious from the outside, but certainly internally, I would be like, they'd be like, yeah, we're going to Man United this weekend. And I'm like, we used to go to the Atlanta Silverbacks, and play in front of 1,000 people, or if that. And now we're going to Old Trafford and winning in front of 80,000 people and beating them, at Old Trafford. And you being sat on the bench and you're like, this is the coolest thing ever. You're like, this is fucking cool. And so, like there were those moments, but I think that's what everyone looks at from the outside, is like, oh, it must be like that all the time. But to be honest, once you've been to Swansea once, you've been to Swansea 100 times. And like, there are very few moments now that I would say that I really get that kind of like, oh, this is really cool. But at the beginning, it was like every day, there was something really cool that was happening. And so it was almost too exciting at times. But, then understanding I had to sort of, improve my level, because at Indy I'd been in charge of like that much stuff, quite a large amount of stuff. And then at Southampton, it was very much a narrowing of my scope. And so, had to really sort of focus on it and be the best I could be at that level. And actually then at West Ham, I was head of department of that little bit. So it meant I even did less of it. And so, but you always find a way to keep yourself busy, and there always seems to be too much work. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience though.
Fantastic. I'd just like to add in that Hugo's views of Swansea are not representative of the podcast. But I suppose one surprising thing you said there was, obviously you take a club like Southampton that's been around for 100+ years.
Yeah.
But there's been a fight really to kind of integrate a player care department there. or perhaps choosing my words better, the clubs were reluctant to invest in player care or to educate staff around that area.
Yeah.
From your experience, Hugo, was that more a case of not being able to kind of correlate that with tangible effects on the pitch?
I think I don't think this is even a past tense thing. This is still a current thing that we struggle with, and obviously now I'm a consultant trying to get clubs to do this on a regular basis, and I think the way it was perceived, and probably still is perceived to a certain extent, is that it's like, well, I'm not paying someone to get handbags for wives, like that's a nonsense, like, well, we're not doing that, or they're paid $100,000 a week, they can sort their own shit out, and so that's something that I still encounter today. So that's not something that's gone away. And I think you can look at the level of player care across the Premier League in terms of resources, not in terms of the quality of the people. The quality is very good, but there's still 2 clubs in the Premier League with no player care at all at the first team level. There's 9 clubs with just 1 person doing it. So the majority of the Premier League does not have appropriate first team player care, because clubs still don't see the value in it, or for whatever reason they don't have it. So I think it's not just something that happened 10 years ago, it's something that's happening now. And I think that's why I'm working with clubs to kind of say, look, what clubs are interested in is increasing performance or reducing costs. Those are the 2 things that clubs care about the most. So I'm trying to show that player care can certainly reduce costs and can probably indirectly affect performance. And I'm not going to go and say here, look, if you spend $100,000 on player care a year, you're going to win 10 more games. Like, I just can't do that, and I wouldn't try and do that. But actually, in terms of players, if you buy a player for £50 million, he doesn't settle, and then plays like poorly all season and then gets transferred out for £30 million, you've just lost £20 million. Well, when you can reduce your risk of that player not settling by making sure he has all the support there, has all the infrastructure to settle him in, he may well not settle anyway, but you've reduced that risk of that happening. So that's what I'm trying to say to clubs is, why would you put this in the hands of agents who necessarily don't have your club's interest at heart? They have their own interest and the players' interest more, but certainly, financially their interest. So I always say an agent wants a player to be 80% settled at a club, so he can potentially move him on if he does well. But a club needs a player to be 100% settled. So why would clubs rely on someone who doesn't work for the club, who hasn't really got the club's best interest in heart, to do quite an important onboarding process for a star player that they're fully financially responsible for? They pay this transfer fee, they pay the wages. So if it goes wrong, it's not on the agent, it's on the player. So on the club. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work still to be done in terms of education around player care, and also, the industry as a whole being taken more seriously, which, I'm not sure it is industry-wide. There are certainly clubs that take it more seriously than others, but as an industry, I don't think it's up there yet.
Yeah, it's certainly an issue exacerbated by the vast amounts of money we see spent on transfers and on wages. But is it an issue solely confined to football? Or, from meeting other practitioners or colleagues in other sports such as rugby, Formula One, Aussie rules, do they have the same problems? Or would you say they'd be ahead of football?
I think the thing with football is, because of the cash available, they tend to be somewhat lazy in terms of, it'll take a lot of work to get a good player care department or everything operating efficiently. Whereas clubs can, in the Premier League, certainly can, we'll just replace that player, he's not very good. Well, he probably is quite good. There aren't bad players in the Premier League. There are better players and not so as good players, but there's not bad players in the Premier League. So why is that? It's easier for a club to replace that player than ask, why is that player not performing? What is wrong with either us or with him, to make sure he's not playing? In other sports, they don't have that luxury. You look at, rugby league especially, is known as one of the best sports in the world for looking after its athletes. Their athletes are paid obviously a fraction of what footballers are, but the clubs don't have the budget as well. So, looking at what, there's a guy, Steve McCormack, who works for rugby, in the rugby league player care. And, I love talking to him because he's such a great guy to speak to, but he was Scotland's rugby coach. And then now is working as player welfare. So, but you look at what they do, they have to prepare these guys, not only for a second career, but also really get the best out of them because they have such limited budgets. And I think football can be lazy in that regard. So, but the thing is, because we have the resources in football, it means that we should be able to be above those sports. And it looks different in different things. Olympic sport athletes have very different needs and demands and support needed than professional footballers. So it's not a case of like they're bad, we're good, or the other way around. It's everyone needs different things. Formula One drivers, they have a team around them of. They normally have a trainer who kind of does their meals for them. They'll have like a personal assistant. So like their level of support is much more individualized. And so a player care thing doesn't necessarily work as well in that environment because, it's very much individuals at the top of a team sport. So it's interesting, but, I think my experience has solely been in football. And yes, I've spoken to people in other sports, but really football's where I think there can be the most growth. But again, the Premier League is ahead of the rest of Europe in this. So the rest of Europe looks at the Premier League as the best model. And I don't think the Premier League necessarily has the best model. So, I think there's so much growth in this area that's going to come in the next sort of 5-10 years, I think.
Well, and I suppose, unfortunately, when you look at the football industry in isolation, Hugo, I mean, there's such a culture, unfortunately, of players being taken advantage of. Be it from commercial sponsors to clubs themselves, outside favours, I'm sure you're more aware of than I am. But I suppose most crucially, you have to establish a relationship of trust and respect from day one. So just take us perhaps inside, I mean, when you're at Southampton and West Ham, perhaps, the onboarding process of signing a player. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's the trust and transparency thing has always been a center to what I do. And I think, it takes obviously years to build up trust and a second to lose it. So I've always taken that very seriously. When a player signs, it's about trying to sort the sort of the 6 or 7 main things, which is, house or accommodation, bank account, transport, car, phone, visas, English lessons, and kids in school. And what we find is after those sort of key things are sorted, then the player is much more self-sufficient and kind of that's what's immediate, and then the rest of it can kind of come afterwards. So, we try and sort those things as quickly as possible, but also we don't want to just find them the wrong place that they're going to have to move from in 3 months' time. But it could be, look, what we're going to do is we put you into a furnished flat, for a couple of months while you get to know the area, and then we can pick where you want to do with a bit less pressure, and you're not in a hotel room with 2 kids. But yeah, it's about trying to get them, hitting the ground running as quickly as possible. If you're paying someone 70 grand a week as a club, every day they take and they're not settled in, it costs you 10 grand. So there really is time ticking and the money adds up really quickly. So it's in your interest to get these things right as quickly as possible. So, we try and sort those things, and then, you move into a different period of player care where it's more, trying to support them long term. But yeah, the ongoing process is vital to get it right.
And then next you have the player care group, which you helped establish late last year, Hugo, setting up a consultancy amidst the pandemic, theorizing what you've learned throughout your years in the practice. I mean, upon hindsight, when you were reflecting, were you surprised by the knowledge you had amassed over the years? Because I'd imagine working in football for as long as you have, the days become weeks, the weeks become months, the months become years.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it feels like I've been doing it forever, but in some ways, like I graduated uni less than 8 years ago. And so, and I think that kind of shows where player care is in its infancy, that someone who left uni in 2013 can be, again, not something that I would really try and shout about myself, but I would consider myself one of the leading lights of player care. And being done that in 8 years from having left uni, I think is quite surprising. I don't think you'd get a physio or a sports scientist or something to have done the same thing. So, and I think that shows the sort of infancy that the player care industry is in. But yeah, I don't think I know everything. And I always love talking to my colleagues at other clubs or in other sports to try and see what they do differently. And I try and pick up bits from everybody. But I also think it's, we have been able to do really good stuff, especially at West Ham. I think genuinely West Ham had one of the best player care departments in the world, not because of my genius or anything like that, but because we had 3 people who were really motivated, really interested, but also were willing to sort of not just say, well, we've always done that, or, what are other people doing, but actually let's try something new ourselves. So, we tried lots of new things and we made some mistakes, of course, but I think the feedback I got from players, managers, and all that was so positive that I knew we were doing the right thing. And when I look at other clubs trying to kind of borrow my ideas or, you know, hire my staff, then that means that we were doing something interesting there and something right. So, you know, I think that kind of shows how a club with a bit of drive and a bit of focus on this can really see massive results very quickly. And that's kind of why I'm doing the consulting thing, because I think I do have a unique perspective. Most player liaisons don't switch club, and I've run the player care at 2 different clubs now. So I think I've got a unique perspective that I can offer people, and whether it's through, you know, the online certificate that I'm running for people who want to get in the industry, or whether it's for, you know, clubs wanting full consulting services, you know, I think what I'm trying to do is help other people to do better, because my ultimate goal is, you know, that every player has a proper support within their organization. And I think that's really important.
Of course. And then, of course, you've mentioned there's certificate in player care, and you've numerous other projects which I'm aware of. But when an organization or a club approaches you for the first time, Hugo, at the player care group, what are some of the most common challenges which they are facing?
I think it's just the thing I get most is that we want to do something more in player care. We just don't know what we're supposed to be doing. And so they come to me almost with like an open question, not like the players are running riot and it's a disaster. It's just like, we want to do more. We just don't know what we should be doing. Can you help? And so from there, it's me going into the club and sort of speaking to people and saying like, okay, this is where I think you guys are actually doing okay, but this is where I think you guys could have some real benefit, you know, in increasing your support or your resources or whatever. So, but I think it's just people, it's kind of a buzzword right now with, you know, with mental health as a buzzword and well-being as a buzzword and player care as a buzzword, but people don't really understand what it means. So certainly from player care point of view, I can add real expertise to it and give them some options that they can either choose to put in or not, but, you know, and try and help them find the right staff and make sure that they've got the right, you know, complementing skills in their department, because there's no point having 3 of the same person, because, you know, that doesn't really make yourself 3 times better. So I think it's really just like a curiosity from clubs that we don't actually really know what you're doing and what we're doing. And, you know, we could use some advice, and it's normally pretty open-ended like that.
Cool in a way. You know, there's that phrase from Peter Drucker, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I was listening to a podcast with Jesse Marsh recently, manager of Red Bull Salzburg, and he slightly disagrees. He believes the culture is part of the strategy. And I suppose, in effect, with what you guys are doing at the player care group is, for most clubs or organizations, formulating that strategy for the first time and then hopefully trying to embed the process. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yeah, I think, you know, when the clubs that tend to be more interested in player care are the clubs that have that culture of kind of that 360 support, that looking at the bigger picture. You know, if you've got a club that's trying to save as much money as possible, even though I think we can save the money in the long term, I think, you know, it wouldn't be a natural fit. So I think probably on most times they already have the culture, or they're keen to build the culture. But yeah, we try and put in processes and strategies to things that often are done anyway. Like it's just kind of saying like, look, well, why do we do this stuff? Well, you know, we do this, you know, let's do this in a specific way every time, so it's the same no matter which player liaison picks up the phone or which player you're dealing with. And I think trying to understand the why behind the what is really important. Like, why are we doing these things? But you know, it's tough because it comes with experience, and like, I am very, very different to the person who joined Indy 11 in 2013. So I've evolved the way I operate. You know, I was probably the strictest I've ever been, was probably managing the cricket team at uni. And I look back at some of the emails I sent, because I've still got my email address, and I can't believe how strict I was on these players. You know, they were 1 minute late for practice, they would drop for the game. You know, I don't care. In Premier League, you know, if someone's a minute late, they would just wait for the bus. You know, we're not going to leave a player behind who's key for the game, you know, to make a point, really. I mean, some managers might, but in reality, it's too important. So, like, I've changed massively as a person as well. And so, you know, I think that's something where you can have all the knowledge and the teaching in the world, but actually to have that experience is really, really important. And that's why it's quite hard to find these heads of department, heads of player care, because you really, unless you've really done it before and you really like get it, it can be quite difficult. But also in the same way, if you've been in a club that doesn't do it so well, or working in a bad system for a number of years, you're going to be preconditioned to have some bad ways of doing things. So it's actually really, really hard to try and find those people to run these departments. And and obviously I don't do it myself anymore. I just consult. We're not a concierge service. We're not a external player care department. So it's really trying to help the clubs find those people.
And I suppose, I mean, the main topic of this podcast, Hugo, is of course player care. But given what's happened this week, it would be remiss of me not to add, given your own exposure to high performance environments at Southampton, at West Ham United.
Yeah.
In your own view, is there enough being done for the care and support of staff like yourself or managers? I mean, case in point being, we saw earlier on this week how vulnerable and exposed Jurgen Klopp was in a press conference before the Leeds United game, just being questioned about the European Super League. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm not going to go and comment on other clubs and organizations that I have had no experience of. I think from my own experiences, there was a lot of pressure on staff. I think that it is a highly pressurized environment, as a lot of sport is. But I think, the problem is, I think, and it's not really a problem that can be fixed, is there's such a supply of people who want to do these jobs that, there is so many people. When I post a job for my 2 assistants at West Ham, we had over 1,000 applicants. And so there's so much choice. And the kind of, you always get that feeling from clubs, or often get that feeling from clubs, is like, you're lucky to work here, we could replace you in 2 seconds kind of thing. So, there's always been this kind of feeling that, we've got to keep pushing ourselves. We've got to keep working harder. We've got to miss that wedding or miss that birthday or miss that whatever, because if not, I'm going to fall out of favor, and I think players feel the same pressure. And I think you look at the staff makeups of football teams, and you get a real mix of young people who kind of haven't burnt out yet. You get then the old guys who have somehow either managed to push through it or found a role where, they're not burning out as much. But you really don't see a lot of sort of people in their middle age, because most of those people have burnt out and either gone to private practice or left the sport. And, I was always quite worried about leaving full-time football in the fact that it's all I'd ever done. Like, genuinely, I'd never done. I mean, this is the first time I've had weekends off since I was probably 13. So I've just never been used to it. And now I'm like, weekends off are great. I understand why people like these. These are actually have 2 days every week when no one else works and no one's going to call you and you can just do whatever you want. Is great. But I was always that fear of you're going to miss it so much. And yeah, I miss bits of it. Sure I do. But I've not missed the games. I don't miss traveling to matches. I don't watch the games. I'll sometimes flick them on if they're on, but I don't even know who we're playing. West Ham are playing this weekend, because it's not part of my life anymore. So I don't know. I think it is tough, and I think there's a lot of stress. I think especially if you're in Europe and you're traveling sort of Thursday, Sunday, that can be really, really tough. But at the end of the day, it's a very rewarding environment. There were very few days, if any, that I didn't want to go to work. And I think I'm very lucky in that regard. And to be a part of something really big that, affects people around the world. I knew that when we beat Man United at Old Trafford, which I think we did twice, that it's probably 1 billion Man United fans around the world really upset right now. And that's, not that I'm in the business of making people upset, but to think you've had, even 1% of a really seismic world event, which is Man United losing at home, was a really, really cool feeling. A really, you don't get really that other than politics, probably in sport. So it was nice to be part of something that people genuinely care about. But that feeling only lasts a certain amount of time. So yeah, I think it's a massively pressured environment for staff, especially at the top level.
And for someone like yourself, Hugo, somebody who's so driven and there's been clear progress wherever and whatever you've done in your life, be it at Indy 11 to Southampton, being a player liaison officer to heading up the department of West Ham, to now having your own consultancy. I mean, you're only 30 years of age. Is there any end goal, or I suppose the larger question, I mean, what legacy, if at all, would you love to leave behind with the player care group?
In terms of goals, I don't know. I mean, I'm open to anything, and I think that's why I wanted to do this consultancy, is not only to take a step back, and I think that's been really important, to try and breathe a little bit for the first time in my working career, because being on call 24 hours a day for 11 months of the year, you don't have time to really kind of reflect on yourself. So I've enjoyed the sort of 4 months so far that I've been working for myself. would I go back into a club? Potentially, but like not really angling for it. Like if it came and it was the right thing, then I would do it. But, you know, I've moved so many times in my life. I don't want to keep moving, you know, so we will see, I think. You know, I'm quite open to leaving sport as well. You know, for me, like, this is something that I enjoy. It's something I'm good at, but it's not the be all and end all for me. And I think that's where you can have the most success, is when you don't crave it and you don't, like, you're not desperate for it. You know, it's just, if it happens, it happens. In terms of legacy, like, I hope that I've been able to change player care for the better. I hope that in the future people will, you know, whether it's people who've done the course, and, you know, we hope, you know, we've got one guy who's done the course and moved to a job already, which is great. We've had a couple of others who've had interviews, and it's not, we don't promise anything with the course, but if I can give a couple of those guys my way of doing things, and that's taken into other clubs, I think that for me is what I want. But, you know, just try and have made a positive impact on something like football would be fantastic. But, you know, I'm not too worried about that. Like, football is very transient, and football moves on very quickly. And you know, like, you know, when I resigned at Southampton, the players were like, "Oh my God, well, how are we ever going to cope? It's going to be a disaster." You know, like, I was like, "I'm leaving this," you know, and like, yeah, you know, obviously I get messages every now and then, but clubs have been there 100 years. They're going to be there for another 100 years. Like, one member of staff leaving shouldn't and won't be the be all and end all. So, like, yeah, maybe it was a blip, or maybe it was a little bit difficult for a couple of months, but, like, you know, I think if you kid yourself and think that you're going to give everything to the club and the club will give back to you, even if it's not intentional, like, I think you're kidding yourselves. And, you know, I look at people who've worked at clubs for 30 years and 30, 40 years, or whatever it is, and they'll retire, and, like, yeah, there'll be a little party for them or something, but in 10 years time, no one will know who they are. And I think that for me is not what I want to be. I want to be someone who's got a lot of fulfillment in life and professionally, but not let professional life sort of take over and be who you are. So for me, that's really important.
Of course. And I suppose finally, to close, Hugo, I mean, aside from player care, one thing which listeners may not know about you is that you're very generous with your time, in terms of, you know, providing advice and being a resource for those aspiring to enter the industry.
Yeah.
We first came across each other in Birkbeck College somewhat over 2 years ago now at this stage. And at that time, you had remarked to me that you reckon you had helped or provided advice to over something like 600 people who wished to enter the industry. But I suppose if you were to meet somebody in a lift, and per se, if they had their elevator pitch with them, they had 30 seconds with you, Hugo, what would you wish for them to say?
I don't know what I'd wish for them to say.
Sorry, what would you like to hear? That's even, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I want to hear why someone wants to do something. So, you know, I've read a number of CVs, I mean, hundreds of CVs over the years, and I've only ever recruited from outside the industry. I've never recruited someone from another club, because I think that there were so many great people outside the industry who want to get in, who have not been given a chance yet. And I'm a firm believer in that. If you bring someone in, that they will work harder for you, and that they will be open to your ways of doing things. So, you know, like my department at West Ham, Barney, you know, he was a linguist, you know, a linguist student who graduated, but he was working basically in a pub. And Emma was, you know, working at HR for a large corporation and helping with women's rugby. And neither of them had ever worked in football before. And I thought, you know, they came through the process, and they were so strong, but so warm, such nice people, such good people. And I thought, yeah, they don't know football, but I can teach that. That's where I come in. And, you know, now Barney's number 2 at the player care of Man City, which is absolutely superb. And, you know, Emma's doing a great job at West Ham. So, you know, like, I look at that and I think that for me is what I love, is to see someone's passion. And that's why I don't really care about CVs. I care about cover letters. I want to see your passion come through. I want to see your warmth come through. I want to see why you want to do it. And not because you're a season ticket holder of whatever club. I want to see it because, you know, you want to help people. You want to, you know, be a part of something new. What is it that drives you? And I think, you know, that would be my advice to people is, and that's not going to be the same for everyone, because a lot of hiring managers aren't interested in that. But for me personally, like, why are you passionate about this? Why do you really want to do it? And if I feel like you don't have a passion for player care, then you won't get in the interview, because there are a lot of people who are just like, well, I'll do anything to do a job, you know, work in football, and I'll do marketing or player care or whatever. And I'm like, no, that's not for me. You know, like, I want you to really want to do this. So know why you want to do it and be able to talk about it eloquently, I think, are really important things.
For everybody listening, I'll be sure to link in the show notes below the Player Care group. Hugo, a huge thanks once more for coming on the podcast. It's been absolutely eye-opening to gain insight into your journey to date, and I wish you all the success for the future.
Thanks, Connor. Appreciate having me on.
Top man. Thanks, Hugo.
No worries.